The rifle felt cold against Captain Maya Rodriguez's cheek, despite the Arizona sun bearing down on the Fort Huachuca firing range. 2,000 yards downrange, a steel target no bigger than a dinner plate waited in the desert heat, shimmering like a mirage through her Schmidt and Bender scope. The wind was tricky today, gusting from the southwest at 8 miles per hour, with thermals rising off the baked earth that could send a bullet dancing sideways at the worst possible moment. "Impossible shot, Captain," Colonel James Mitchell drawled behind her, his Texas accent thick with condescension. The silver eagle on his collar caught the morning light as he adjusted his campaign hat, a theatrical gesture that had become his signature over 23 years of military service. "Hell, I'd bet my bird on it. That's extremely long range in these conditions. And you're shooting a standard-issue M24. Maya didn't turn around. She could feel the weight of 37 pairs of eyes on her back. The entire advanced marksmanship course, plus instructors, plus the handful of officers who'd wandered over when word spread that the new female sniper instructor was about to attempt what most considered a fool's errand. In the periphery of her vision, she caught sight of Sergeant First Class Tommy Chen, her spotter and closest friend on base, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. He knew that look in her eyes, had seen it in Afghanistan when she'd made shots that defied logic and physics in equal measure. The whispers started low behind her. "She's good, but not that good. 2,000 in this wind? Come on. Colonel's about to learn what pride costs." But Maya heard none of it. Her world had narrowed to the crosshairs dancing against that distant steel, to the rhythm of her breathing, to the steady thump of her heartbeat that seemed to sync with the desert wind. This wasn't just about the shot. It never was, really. 3 months ago, when Maya had transferred to Fort Huachuca to become the Army's first female long-range marksmanship instructor, Colonel Mitchell had made his position clear in ways both subtle and obvious. Women belonged in support roles, he'd said during her initial briefing, not behind a rifle making life-and-death decisions. The comment had been delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes, followed by an assignment to teach basic marksmanship to new recruits instead of the advanced course she'd been promised. Maya had kept her mouth shut then, just as she had kept it shut during the past 92 days of sideways glances, muttered comments about diversity hires, and the persistent rumor that her 73 confirmed kills in Afghanistan were somehow inflated or assisted by male team members. She'd watched younger, less experienced male instructors receive the assignments and respect that should have been hers. Watched them teach techniques she'd pioneered in combat zones where failure meant death. But today was different. Today, Colonel Mitchell had pushed too far. It had started during the morning briefing, when he announced that Maya would be transferred to administrative duties at month's end. "Captain Rodriguez has done fine work with the basics," he'd said, that same cold smile playing at his lips. "But advanced instruction requires a certain steadiness under pressure that comes with experience." The implication hung in the air like cordite smoke. Maya had more combat experience than any instructor on the base, had spent 3 tours downrange putting rounds on target while most of these men were stateside pushing papers. But experience, apparently, was measured differently when you wore a bra under your body armor. That's when Staff Sergeant Rebecca "Tank" Thompson had spoken up from the back of the room. Tank was built like her nickname suggested, 5'2" and solid muscle, with hands that could field strip an M4 in 30 seconds flat, and a mouth that had gotten her in trouble with superior officers more times than anyone could count. "With respect, sir, Captain Rodriguez has more time behind a scope in combat than—" "That'll be enough, Sergeant," Mitchell had cut her off. But the damage had been done. The room had shifted, uncomfortable glances exchanged between the enlisted men who'd served alongside women downrange and knew better, who had seen what Maya could do when it mattered. Then Corporal David Kim, barely 22 and fresh from sniper school, had raised his hand with the kind of nervous energy that preceded either brilliance or disaster. Sir, maybe we could see a demonstration. I mean, if Captain Rodriguez is transferring to admin, shouldn't we know what we're losing?
Mitchell's jaw had tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of his men. Maya had seen the calculation in his eyes, the quick mental math that weighed his options. He could shut down the questioning with a word, pull rank and end the discussion. But that would make him look weak, uncertain. Or he could double down, prove his point in front of everyone. "Fine," he'd said, standing and straightening his uniform. "Captain Rodriguez, select your weapon. Let's see what 3 tours taught you." And now here they were, the entire morning class arranged in a rough semicircle behind the firing line, watching Maya prepare for a shot that would either vindicate everything she'd worked for or confirm every doubt Mitchell had planted about her capabilities. The M24 sniper weapon system wasn't her first choice for this kind of shot. In Afghanistan, she'd used a more advanced rifle system, with better optics and ammunition specifically designed for extreme long-range work. But the M24 was what the Army issued, and it was what she'd have to prove herself with. The rifle had been her companion for countless hours on the range, and she knew its peculiarities, how the barrel heated and shifted slightly after the first few shots, how the trigger broke just a fraction of an ounce heavier than specifications claimed, how the stock fit against her shoulder like it had been custom-made. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Tommy Chin slid into position beside her, spotting scope already trained downrange. They'd worked together for 2 years in Afghanistan, and their partnership had the kind of wordless efficiency that only came from shared danger and absolute trust. He was the kind of soldier who made everyone around him better, calm under fire, precise in his observations, and utterly uninterested in the politics that seemed to consume so much military energy. "Wind shifting," Tommy murmured, his voice barely audible over the desert breeze. "Gusting to 12 now, maybe 15. Are you sure about this, Maya?" She wasn't sure. 2,000 yards in shifting wind was at the absolute edge of the M24's effective range, even with match-grade ammunition. But uncertainty was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with Mitchell's Silver Eagle gleaming in her peripheral vision, not with 37 pairs of eyes waiting to see if the woman sniper was really as good as her reputation suggested. Maya adjusted her position slightly, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle settle into her shoulder. The shooting mat beneath her radiated heat from the desert sun, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the dry air. She closed her eyes for a moment, filtering out the whispers behind her, the shuffle of boots on gravel, the distant hum of vehicles moving across the base. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she was back in the mountains of Afghanistan. FOB Chapman, her 3rd tour, a Taliban commander moving through a village 2 clicks away. The shot had been similar to this one, extreme range, tricky wind, and the lives of her team hanging in the balance. She had one chance, one bullet to end a threat that had been killing American soldiers for months. She'd made the shot then, just as she'd made 72 others, when everything depended on her ability to put a bullet exactly where it needed to go. But this felt different. In combat, failure meant her friends might die. Here, failure meant something more abstract, but equally important. The credibility of every woman who would come after her, every female soldier who would be judged by what happened in the next 60 seconds. Maya opened her eyes and settled back behind the scope. The target swam into view, a dark circle against the pale desert backdrop. At 2,000 yards, it looked impossibly small, a speck that seemed to dance and weave with every breath of wind. She made minute adjustments to the scope's elevation and windage knobs, compensating for the bullet's trajectory and the cross breeze that wanted to push her shot wide. "Conditions are stable," Tommy reported quietly. "Wind holding at 10 to 12, no significant thermals. Range confirmed at 2,000 yards even." Behind them, Colonel Mitchell cleared his throat. "Whenever you're ready, Captain, though I should point out that even if you hit the backstop, it's still a miss." Maya felt a flash of anger burn through her chest, hot and sudden. The backstop was a large earthen berm behind the target, 20 feet wide and easy to hit at this range. Mitchell
suggesting that she'd be lucky to even come close to the actual target, that hitting anywhere downrange would be an acceptable result for a woman attempting a man's job. She forced the anger down, channeled it into focus. Anger made you shake, made you pull shots wide or high. But controlled anger, anger transformed into cold determination, could make you steady as a machine rest. Maya took a deep breath, released half of it, and let her finger find the trigger. The M24's trigger was crisp and clean, with just enough weight to prevent accidental discharges. She applied pressure slowly, steadily, feeling the sear engage and the firing pin cock back another fraction. The world narrowed to that tiny circle of steel, 2,000 yards away and shimmering in the desert heat. Maya's breathing slowed, her heartbeat seemed to quiet. She was aware of Tommy beside her, of the crowd behind her, of Colonel Mitchell's skeptical gaze, but they all faded into background noise. There was only the target, the crosshairs, and the perfect moment when earth and wind and physics would align. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a sound like thunder, the muzzle blast raising a small cloud of dust from the range floor. Maya worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round out of habit, though she knew she wouldn't need it. Through the scope, she watched the target downrange, waiting for the bullet to complete its 2.5-second journey through the thin desert air. 2,000 yards away, the steel target rang like a church bell. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 heartbeats before Tommy let out a low whistle. "Dead center," he called out, his spotting scope trained on the target. "Perfect hit." Maya rolled away from the rifle and sat up, brushing dust from her ACUs. She didn't need to look at Colonel Mitchell to know what she'd see there. The same expression she'd witnessed a dozen times in Afghanistan, when male soldiers realized that their assumptions about female capabilities were about to cost them something important. "Well," she said quietly, meeting his eyes for the first time that morning, "I believe you mentioned something about a bet." The silence stretched across the firing range like a held breath. Colonel Mitchell's face had gone through several interesting color changes, from confident tan to pale to something approaching crimson, while his hand unconsciously moved to touch the silver eagle pinned to his collar. Maya watched the calculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid reassessment of a situation that had just slipped entirely out of his control. Staff Sergeant Thompson was the first to break the silence, her voice carrying across the range with barely contained glee. "Hot damn, Captain, that was a textbook!" The enthusiasm in her voice sparked something in the other enlisted soldiers, and suddenly the respectful quiet dissolved into excited chatter and congratulations. But Maya wasn't listening to the praise. She was watching Mitchell, studying the way his jaw worked silently, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. In her 3 months at Fort Huachuca, she'd learned to read the subtle signs that preceded his decisions, the tightening around his eyes that meant he was about to reassert control, the particular set of his shoulders that suggested he was preparing to remind everyone exactly who wore the bird on their collar. "Outstanding shooting, Captain Rodriguez," Mitchell said finally, his voice carrying the kind of forced professionalism that barely concealed seething anger. "However, one lucky shot doesn't constitute a complete evaluation of instructional capabilities." Maya felt her stomach sink. Of course, she should have known it wouldn't be that simple. In Mitchell's world, women succeeded only by accident or assistance, never by skill or training.
A perfect shot at 2,000 yards wasn't proof of competence. It was an anomaly to be explained away.
Maya watched Kim's face fall and saw the moment when his enthusiasm collided with military reality. The kid was sharp, probably destined for bigger things if he could learn when to keep his mouth shut, but right now his defense was only making things worse for her. Tommy Chan appeared at her elbow, helping her secure the M24 in its case with the kind of efficient movements that came from years of working together. "Nice shot," he said quietly, pitched low enough that only she could hear. "But you know this isn't over, right?" Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd known it was a long shot, no pun intended. To think that one demonstration would change Mitchell's mind about her capabilities or his plans for her transfer. But some foolish part of her had hoped that proving herself so definitively might shift the dynamic, might earn her the grudging respect that seemed to come so easily to her male counterparts. Instead, she felt like she was back in Afghanistan, sitting in a briefing room while a major explained why her confirmed kill on a high-value target couldn't possibly be accurate. Must have been the work of the male sniper team that had been operating in the same area. Never mind that she'd been alone on Overwatch. Never mind that she had photos of the target through her scope before and after the shot. Success was always suspicious when it came from the wrong source. "All right, people, show's over," Mitchell announced, clapping his hands together with forced heartiness. "Return to your scheduled training. Captain Rodriguez, I'll need to see you in my office in 1,300 hours." The crowd began to disperse, but Maya noticed the way conversations continued in small clusters, the way heads turned back toward her as soldiers walked away. Word would spread quickly through the base. The female captain had made an impossible shot, had called out the colonel and made him look foolish. By evening, the story would be in every barracks and NCO club, growing with each telling. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a very long war. Maya finished securing her equipment and started the walk back to the instructor building, Tommy falling into step beside her. The Arizona sun was climbing toward its midday peak, and the desert air shimmered with heat waves that made the distant mountains dance like mirages. Fort Huachuca stretched out around them, a sprawling complex of tan buildings and carefully maintained grounds that had been training military intelligence soldiers for nearly a century. "Want to talk about what just happened back there?" Tommy asked as they walked. His tone was carefully neutral, the kind of professional concern that good NCOs perfected over years of managing soldiers through various crises. Maya shook her head. "Nothing to talk about. I made a shot, proving a point. Mitchell's still planning to transfer me to admin, and 37 witnesses won't change that." "Maybe not, but 37 witnesses makes it harder for him to pretend it didn't happen." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, passing clusters of soldiers engaged in various training activities. Maya had always loved this part of military life, the constant hum of preparation, the sense that everyone around her was working towards some greater purpose. Even when that purpose was sometimes unclear, even when politics got in the way, there was something deeply satisfying about being part of an organization dedicated to excellence. It's what had drawn her to the Army in the first place, back when she was 17 and looking for a way out of a small town in New Mexico that never quite fit her right. Maya had been the kind of kid who could field dress a deer at 12 and outshoot her father by 14, but who also read voraciously and dreamed of seeing the world beyond the desert horizons that hemmed in her childhood. The military offered both adventure and purpose, plus the chance to turn her natural shooting ability into something more meaningful than weekend hunting trips. By the time she'd finished basic training, Maya knew she'd found her calling. By the time she'd completed sniper school, she was already thinking of a 20-year career and the kind of leadership positions that could make a real difference.
Afghanistan had both validated and complicated those dreams.
3 tours in some of the most dangerous territory on Earth had proven that she could perform under pressure, could make the kind of split-second decisions that kept people alive. But they'd also shown her how much harder she'd have to work for the same recognition her male peers took for granted. There had been Captain Morrison, her first company commander, who'd initially refused to let her deploy with a sniper team because the men would be distracted. Never mind that she'd outshot every male sniper in the unit during pre-deployment training. It had taken a direct order from the battalion commander and 2 male snipers getting injured before Morrison reluctantly agreed to let her prove herself. Then there was Major Stevens, who'd written her efficiency report after her second tour, and somehow managed to give her outstanding marks for marksmanship while questioning her leadership potential and ability to make tough decisions under pressure. Maya had killed 31 enemy combatants during that deployment, had spent 6 months making life-and-death decisions every time she squeezed the trigger, but somehow her decision-making ability remained suspect. The pattern had continued through her third tour, her advanced training, her assignment to Fort Huachuca. Always the assumption that her successes were flukes, that her skills were somehow lesser or different from those of her male counterparts. Always the sense that she was being evaluated not just on her performance, but on whether women in general deserved to be taken seriously. Maya and Tommy reached the instructor building, a low concrete structure that housed classrooms, offices, and the administrative heart of the marksmanship program. The building was mercifully air-conditioned, a relief after the desert heat, and Maya felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease as they walked through the familiar corridors. "Rodriguez, Chen, get over here." The voice belonged to Master Sergeant Patricia Walsh, the senior NCO responsible for day-to-day operations of the marksmanship program. Walsh was a 22-year veteran who'd come up through the ranks the hard way, earning respect through sheer competence and a no-nonsense attitude that brooked no excuses from anyone. She was also one of the few people on base who'd consistently treated Maya as just another instructor rather than a curiosity to be studied. Walsh was standing in the doorway of her office, arms crossed and wearing the expression that meant someone was about to get either very good news or very bad news. "Word travels fast around here," she said without preamble. "I've already had 3 phone calls about the show you put on at the range." Maya winced. "Master Sergeant, I didn't mean to create a spectacle. The situation just—" "Don't apologize for shooting straight. But we need to talk about what comes next. My office, both of you." Walsh's office was a study in organized chaos. Walls covered with shooting awards, unit citations, and photos from various deployments, while her desk was buried under stacks of training schedules, evaluation forms, and the endless paperwork that kept the Army functioning. She gestured for Maya and Tommy to take seats, while she settled behind her desk. "So," Walsh said, leaning back in her chair, "Colonel Mitchell is less than pleased about this morning's events. I just got off the phone with him, and he's moved up your meeting to 1400 hours. He's also requested that I prepare a detailed report on your conduct during the demonstration." Maya felt her heart sink. "Conduct? I followed proper range safety procedures. Don't apologize for shooting straight," Walsh interrupted. "But we need to talk about what comes next. My office, both of you." Walsh's office was a study in organized chaos. Walls covered with shooting awards, unit citations, and photos from various deployments, while her desk was buried under stacks of training schedules, evaluation forms, and the endless paperwork that kept the Army functioning. She gestured for Maya and Tommy to take seats while she settled behind her desk. "So," Walsh said, leaning back in her chair, "Colonel Mitchell is less than pleased about this morning's events. I just got off the phone with him, and he's moved up your meeting to 1400 hours. He's also requested that I prepare a detailed report on your conduct during the demonstration." Maya felt her heart sink. "Conduct? I followed proper range safety procedures. Relax, Captain.
I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between conducting yourself professionally and showing off. What you did today was professional. What Mitchell is doing now is damage control. Walsh opened a file folder on her desk and pulled out a sheaf of papers. I've been reviewing your records since you got here, comparing your performance to the other instructors. Want to know what I found? Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer.
Your students consistently score 15% higher on their final evaluations than students in comparable courses. Your range safety record is perfect, 0 incidents in 3 months. And your own shooting scores are the highest we've recorded in the 5 years I've been running this program. Tommy shifted in his chair. Then why? Politics, Walsh said simply. Colonel Mitchell has very definite ideas about how this unit should be run and who should be running it. Captain Rodriguez's success challenges some of those ideas. Maya stared at the papers in Walsh's hands, trying to process what she was hearing. So my students are learning more, I'm performing better than my peers, and I'm being transferred to admin because you're inconvenient, Walsh said. Because having a female instructor outperform the male instructors raises questions that Mitchell would rather not answer. Because it's easier to reassign you than to examine whether his assumptions about women in combat roles might be wrong. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of training activities outside. Maya felt a familiar anger building in her chest. Not the hot, immediate fury she'd felt on the range, but the deeper, colder rage that came from being judged by standards that seemed to shift depending on who was applying them. "What are my options?" she asked finally. Walsh leaned forward, her expression serious. "Officially, you can request MAST, file a complaint with the Inspector General, maybe request a transfer to a different unit, all of which will take months to process and will probably end your career regardless of the outcome. And unofficially, you keep your head down, accept the transfer, and hope that your next commanding officer is more interested in results than politics." Maya stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over the training ranges. In the distance, she could see soldiers working through various exercises, moving through mock urban environments, practicing close-quarters combat techniques, learning the skills that might keep them alive in places like Afghanistan or Iraq. "I didn't join the army to keep my head down," she said quietly. "I joined to serve, to lead, to make a difference. How am I supposed to do that, filing reports and managing supply inventories?" "I know," Walsh said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. "And for what it's worth, I think this whole situation is bullshit. But sometimes we have to play the long game, wait for better opportunities." Maya turned back from the window, studying the 2 NCOs who'd become her closest allies on base. Tommy had served with her in Afghanistan, had seen her at her best and worst, and never once questioned her abilities or her right to be there. Walsh had been in the Army long enough to understand the system's limitations, but still believed in its potential for positive change. They were good people, loyal friends, and they were asking her to accept something that felt fundamentally wrong. "What if I don't want to wait?" Maya asked. Walsh and Tommy exchanged glances. "What are you thinking?" Tommy asked carefully. Maya wasn't entirely sure yet, but she could feel an idea forming, shaped by years of frustration and a morning's worth of vindication. "I'm thinking that maybe it's time to stop playing by rules that were never designed for people like me. I'm thinking that maybe there's a way to make this about more than just one captain's career prospects." She looked out the window again, watching soldiers train for battles that might never come, preparing for challenges that would test every skill and assumption they brought to the fight. "I'm thinking," Maya said slowly, "that if Colonel Mitchell wants to make this about what women can and can't do in the Army, maybe it's time to give him exactly the kind of demonstration he can't explain away." The walk to Colonel Mitchell's office felt like a death march, each step along the polished corridor echoing with the weight of impending confrontation. Maya had spent the past hour in her quarters, changing into a fresh uniform and trying to prepare mentally for whatever Mitchell had planned. She'd been through enough military politics to know that the meeting could go several ways, from a simple dressing down to formal disciplinary action, but all of them ended with her influence and credibility diminished. The headquarters building was the oldest structure on Fort Huachuca, built in 1886 when the post was still an active cavalry fort fighting Apache wars. The thick stone walls had witnessed more than a century of military history, and Maya wondered how many other soldiers had walked these same halls, facing career-defining moments that seemed to hinge more on politics than performance. Mitchell's aide, a nervous-looking specialist named Henderson, gestured toward the closed office door. "The colonel will see you now, ma'am." Maya knocked twice and entered Mitchell's gruff, "Come in." The office was exactly what she'd expected. Walls lined with military photographs and awards, a massive oak desk positioned to maximize the psychological advantage of anyone sitting behind it, and American and Army flags positioned to frame Mitchell's chair like a patriotic backdrop. But Mitchell wasn't alone. Seated to his right was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Brennan, the base deputy commander, and one of the highest-ranking female officers Maya had encountered since arriving at Fort Huachuca. Brennan's presence was both encouraging and ominous. Encouraging because she might provide some balance to Mitchell's obvious bias. Ominous because her involvement suggested this meeting was more significant than Maya had hoped. "Captain Rodriguez," Mitchell began without preamble, "please have a seat. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan has asked to sit in on our discussion." Maya settled into the chair facing Mitchell's desk, keeping her posture military straight and her expression neutral. She'd learned years ago that the first rule of dealing with hostile superior officers was to give them no excuse to escalate beyond the original issue. "I'll be direct," Mitchell continued, his voice carrying the kind of cold formality that preceded bad news. "This morning's display at the firing range was inappropriate and unprofessional. You showed off, grandstanded, and deliberately undermined my authority in front of subordinate personnel." Maya felt her jaw tighten, but kept her voice level. "Sir, I was following your direct order to demonstrate my marksmanship capabilities. I selected an appropriate target and engaged it using standard range procedures. Don't play semantic games with me, Captain. You knew damn well that shot was a publicity stunt designed to embarrass me and question my judgment about my reassignment." Lieutenant Colonel Brennan leaned forward slightly. "Colonel Mitchell, perhaps we should focus on the objective facts. Captain Rodriguez successfully engaged a target at extreme range under challenging conditions. Regardless of motivation, that demonstrates considerable skill. The issue isn't her shooting ability, Sarah. It's her attitude, her willingness to turn a training exercise into a personal vendetta. That kind of behavior is exactly why I have concerns about her leadership potential." Maya couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Sir, with respect, my attitude hasn't been the problem for the past 3 months. I followed every order, maintained military courtesy, and achieved superior results with my students. The only vendetta here seems to be against women in combat roles." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Mitchell's hands flattened against his desk, and Maya could see the vein in his forehead beginning to pulse, the same tell she'd noticed during previous confrontations. "Captain Rodriguez," Mitchell said slowly, "you are walking a very thin line. I've served this army for 23 years, and I've earned my position through dedication and results. I don't need lectures on leadership from someone who's been here 3 months. And I don't need to prove myself repeatedly for the same recognition that male officers receive automatically," Maya shot back, her own anger finally breaking through her professional restraint. "I've served 3 combat tours, earned expert marksmanship badges in multiple weapon systems, and consistently outperformed my peers, but somehow my competence is always in question." Brennan raised a hand. "Both of you, take a breath. This conversation is getting too heated." But Mitchell was beyond listening to diplomatic interventions. You want to know why your competence is in question, Captain? Because soldiers like you think that checking diversity boxes entitles you to respect you haven't earned. Because you mistake political correctness for actual qualification. The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Maya felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Not surprise, because she had suspected Mitchell held these views, but confirmation that the past 3 months of professional courtesy had been a facade. "I see," Maya said quietly. "So my 73 confirmed kills in Afghanistan were political correctness. My perfect safety record and superior teaching results here are diversity boxes." Mitchell leaned back in his chair, apparently realizing he'd gone too far, but unable to find a graceful retreat. "I'm not questioning your service record, Captain. I'm questioning your fitness for advanced instructor duties in a program that requires absolute precision and zero margin for error." "Zero margin for error?" Maya repeated. "Like the kind of margin I had when I was covering your son's unit during their extraction from Kandahar province last year." The silence that followed was deafening. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's eyebrows rose sharply, and Mitchell's face went through another interesting series of color changes. Maya hadn't planned to bring up that particular mission, but Mitchell's condescending tone had triggered memories she'd tried to keep buried. "You didn't know I was there, did you, sir? Second Lieutenant James Mitchell, Jr., 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company. His unit got pinned down by sniper fire during a routine patrol. I was on overwatch 2 clicks away when the call for help came in." Mitchell's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "I put down 3 enemy shooters at ranges between 800 and 1,200 meters, gave your son's unit the window they needed to reach the extraction point, never got a thank you, never got recognition, never even got confirmation that you knew I'd been there. Just another day's work for a soldier who supposedly got her job through political correctness." Lieutenant Colonel Brennan was staring at Maya with something approaching awe, while Mitchell looked like he'd been gut-punched. The revelation had shifted the entire dynamic in the room, transforming the meeting from a disciplinary action into something much more complex. "James," Brennan said quietly, "is this true?" Mitchell nodded slowly, his usual bluster completely deflated. I didn't know. The after-action report just mentioned sniper support from an unidentified asset." Maya stood up, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation and its aftermath. "That's the problem, isn't it, sir? Women like me are unidentified assets. We do the job, we save lives, we achieve results, but somehow we're always invisible when it comes time for recognition or advancement."
Mattered most. If that makes me unfit for instructor duty, then maybe this isn't the army I thought I was serving. Maya left Mitchell's office with her career hanging in the balance and no clear idea what would happen next. But as she walked back through the headquarters building, passing walls lined with photographs of soldiers from different eras and conflicts, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of having stood up for something important, regardless of the personal cost. The base seemed different as she made her way back to the instructor building. Soldiers she passed looked at her with new interest, some offering respectful nods that suggested word of the morning's events had indeed spread quickly through the informal communication networks that connected every military installation. She found Tommy and Master Sergeant Walsh waiting in the break room, both wearing expressions of barely controlled anxiety. Walsh looked up as Maya entered, studying her face for clues about how the meeting had gone. "Well?" Tommy asked. Maya poured herself a cup of coffee from the industrial-strength pot that kept the instructor staff caffeinated through long days on the ranges. "I may have just ended my career," she said, "but I also may have gotten through to him." She gave them a condensed version of the confrontation, watching their expressions shift from concern to amazement to something approaching pride. When she finished, The room was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and distant sounds of training activities. "Holy shit, Maya," Tommy said finally. "You saved his kid?" "I did my job, same as I've been doing for 3 tours." Maya sank into one of the plastic chairs that furnished the break room, suddenly feeling the accumulated weight of months of frustration and stress. The problem is, doing your job isn't enough when people are looking for reasons to dismiss you. Walsh shook her head. "That changes everything, though. Mitchell can't transfer you after finding out you saved his son's life. The optics alone would be a nightmare if word got out." "Maybe. Or maybe he doubles down and transfers me anyway to save face. I've seen strange things happen." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the break room door. Corporal Kim stuck his head in, looking even younger and more nervous than usual. "Excuse me, Captain Rodriguez. There are some people here who want to talk to you." Maya followed Kim out to the main corridor, where she found an unexpected gathering. Staff Sergeant Thompson was there, along with Sergeant First Class Martinez from the Urban Combat Course, Corporal Jackson from the Night Vision Training Program, and half a dozen other instructors and advanced students. They were clustered together with the kind of nervous energy that preceded either celebration or confrontation. Staff Sergeant Thompson stepped forward as the unofficial spokesperson. "Captain, we heard about what happened this morning. All of it. The shot, the meeting with Mitchell, everything." Maya felt her stomach tighten. "Staff Sergeant, if this is about taking sides in some kind of political dispute, it's not," Martinez interrupted. "It's about respect and recognition and making sure the Army doesn't lose one of its best instructors because of someone else's prejudices." Thompson nodded. "Ma'am, I've been teaching here for 4 years. I've seen a lot of instructors come and go. Your students consistently score higher, they're more confident, they're better prepared. That's not politics, that's results. What they're trying to say is that we've got your back, whatever happens next." Maya looked around the group, seeing faces that reflected her own journey through the military system. Some young and idealistic, others seasoned and pragmatic, all united by a shared understanding of what it meant to serve in an institution that didn't always live up to its own ideals about merit and equality.
"I appreciate the support," Maya said carefully, "but I don't want anyone's career getting derailed because of my situation. Colonel Mitchell is still the commanding officer, and he has a long memory for people who cross him." "With respect, ma'am," Sergeant Martinez said, "some things are worth the risk. If we don't stand up for what's right when it matters, then what's the point of wearing the uniform?" Before Maya could respond, Corporal Kim appeared again, this time practically vibrating with excitement. "Captain Rodriguez, you need to see this. There's something happening at the main range." The group moved as one toward the windows that overlooked the primary training area. In the distance, Maya could see an unusual level of activity around Range 7, the advanced long-range course where she'd made her morning demonstration. Vehicles were parked at odd angles, and clusters of people were gathered around what appeared to be measuring equipment. "What are they doing?" Thompson asked. Tommy appeared at Maya's shoulder. "Have you slipped away from the group to make some phone calls?" "I think I know," he said quietly. "Word about your shot reached the marksmanship unit at Fort Benning. Apparently they want to verify the distance and conditions." Maya felt her pulse quicken. The U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit was the service's premier shooting organization, responsible for training Olympic-level competitors and establishing standards for military marksmanship programs. If they were taking an interest in her shot, it meant the morning's events had implications far beyond the local politics of Fort Huachuca. "They can't verify conditions from this morning. Wind patterns change, temperature shifts." "They're not trying to recreate identical conditions," Tommy explained. "They're documenting the range layout, measuring exact distances, and reviewing the video that someone apparently took of your shot." Maya's stomach dropped. "Video?" Thompson grinned. "Corporal Kim was recording training footage for the instructional database. Turns out he captured the whole thing, your setup, the shot, the target impact. It's already made its way up several chains of command. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. A verified 2,000-yard shot with standard military equipment under challenging conditions, captured on video and witnessed by dozens of soldiers. It was the kind of performance that could redefine expectations about military marksmanship capabilities. More importantly, it was the kind of evidence that made it very difficult to dismiss the shooter as unqualified for advanced instruction. "Captain Rodriguez," Kim said, holding up his phone, "you might want to see this too. The video's already been posted to several military forums. The comments are interesting." Maya took the phone and scrolled through the responses to Kim's video post. The reactions ranged from professional admiration to detailed technical analysis to more political commentary. About time someone showed these old-school officers what modern soldiers can do. But it was the identification in some of the comments that made her blood run cold. Captain Maya Rodriguez, 73 confirmed kills, Afghanistan veteran, appeared multiple times, along with increasingly detailed discussions of her combat record and the controversy surrounding her potential transfer to administrative duties. "This is getting out of hand," Maya muttered, handing the phone back to Kim. "I never wanted this to become a public spectacle."
"Too late for that," Walsh said, appearing at the edge of the group with a grim expression. "I just got off the phone with the base public affairs office. They've had 7 media inquiries in the past 2 hours. Apparently the story is being framed as female veteran proves doubters wrong with impossible shot." Maya closed her eyes, trying to process the rapidly expanding scope of what had started as a simple training demonstration. Media attention meant congressional attention, which meant pressure from Pentagon levels that could override local command decisions. It also meant scrutiny of every aspect of her career and personal life, the kind of invasive examination that she'd never wanted or asked for. "There's more," Walsh continued. "Colonel Mitchell has been summoned to brigade headquarters for an immediate meeting with General Harrison. Apparently the general has some questions about personnel decisions in his command." The group fell silent, everyone understanding the implications. General Harrison was known throughout the Army as a no-nonsense commander who had risen through the ranks during the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. He'd seen enough combat to understand the value of proven performers and had little patience for politics that interfered with military effectiveness. "What does this mean for Captain Rodriguez?" asked Thompson. Walsh shrugged. "Could mean anything. Best case, Mitchell gets told to back off and Maya continues as an instructor. Worst case, this becomes such a political hot potato that she gets transferred anyway to avoid ongoing controversy." Maya stepped away from the window, needing space to think. The corridor had filled with more soldiers as word continued to spread, and she could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. Some were clearly supportive, others seemed curious about the woman who'd suddenly become the center of base-wide drama, and a few radiated the kind of hostility that suggested they agreed with Mitchell's perspective on women in combat roles. "I need some air," she announced, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Outside, the Arizona heat was beginning to moderate as afternoon shadows stretched across the base. Maya found herself walking toward the Memorial Garden, a quiet space behind the headquarters building where plaques honored Fort Huachuca soldiers who died in service to their country. It was one of the few places on base where she'd been able to find peace during her months of increasing frustration with Mitchell's leadership. She wasn't surprised when Tommy caught up with her a few minutes later. He'd always been good at reading her moods, knowing when she needed support and when she needed space. Now he simply fell into step beside her, content to walk in silence until she was ready to talk. "I fucked up, didn't I?" Maya said, finally settling onto a bench facing the memorial wall. "How do you figure that?" "This whole thing, the shot, the confrontation with Mitchell, the media attention, I turned a personal dispute into a public circus. Now everyone is going to be watching to see how the Army handles the female sniper controversy, and whatever happens, it's going to reflect on every woman who comes after me." Tommy sat down beside her, considering his words carefully. "You know what I think?
I think you did exactly what you've always done, your job, to the best of your ability, without compromise or excuses. The fact that other people want to make it about politics or gender or whatever doesn't change the fundamental truth of what happened this morning. Which is that you made an impossible shot look routine, proved that 3 tours in Afghanistan taught you something valuable, and reminded everyone on this base why we wear the uniform in the first place. Maya leaned back against the bench, watching clouds move across the desert sky. Mitchell's never going to forgive me for bringing up his son. That was a low blow, even if it was true. Was it, though? You saved that kid's life, Maya. You put your own safety at risk to provide overwatch for a unit in trouble, and you never asked for credit or recognition. That's not a low blow. That's a reminder of what service actually means.
Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. She considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Captain Rodriguez speaking. Captain, this is Colonel Patricia Hawkins from the Office of the Chief of Staff of the Army. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Maya's blood turned to ice water. The Chief of Staff's office was about as high as the Army hierarchy went, short of the Pentagon itself. Whatever was happening had escalated far beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Yes, ma'am, she managed. Good. I've been reviewing reports about an incident at your installation today, and I have some questions about your current assignment and career plans. Are you somewhere you can speak freely? Maya looked around the memorial garden, confirming she was alone except for Tommy, who'd stepped away to give her privacy for the call. Yes, ma'am. Excellent. Captain, I want you to understand that this conversation is informal and off the record. I'm calling in my capacity as a mentor to promising female officers, not as an official representative of the Chief of Staff's office. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am. Outstanding. Now, tell me about your shot this morning. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. For the next 20 minutes, Maya found herself providing a detailed account of the day's events to one of the most senior female officers in the Army. Colonel Hawkins asked pointed questions about the conditions, the equipment used, the witnesses present, and the circumstances that had led to the demonstration in the first place. And Colonel Mitchell's reaction to your performance? Hawkins asked. Maya hesitated, unsure how much detail to provide about her confrontation with Mitchell. He was surprised, ma'am. I think the shot exceeded his expectations. I'm sure it did. Captain, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The video of your shot has reached some very high levels in the Pentagon. There are people who are extremely interested in your capabilities and your potential contributions to future training programs. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Ma'am? However, there are also concerns about the circumstances surrounding your current assignment and the apparent conflict with your commanding officer. The Army cannot afford to be seen as wasting talent or allowing personal biases to influence personnel decisions. I understand, ma'am. Do you? Because what I'm about to tell you could change the trajectory of your entire career. There's an opportunity coming available, a position that would make full use of your skills and experience while giving you the platform to influence training standards across the service. Are you interested in hearing more? Maya looked across the memorial garden, seeing the names of soldiers who had given their lives in service to something larger than themselves. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope that her own service might lead somewhere meaningful. Yes, ma'am, she said. I'm very interested. The conversation with Colonel Hawkins lasted another 30 minutes, during which Maya learned that her morning demonstration had triggered discussions at levels of the Army
hierarchy she'd never imagined reaching. The Pentagon's interest wasn't just about one exceptional shot. It was about the broader implications of modern marksmanship training and the untapped potential of female soldiers in combat specialties. When the call ended, Maya sat in the memorial garden feeling like the world had shifted beneath her feet. Tommy had waited patiently nearby, and now he approached with the cautious expression of someone trying to read a situation that might explode at any moment.
Good news or bad news? He asked. I'm not sure yet, Maya replied honestly, but definitely big news. Before she could elaborate, her phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from Master Sergeant Walsh. Get back here now. Situation developing. Maya and Tommy jogged back to the instructor building, where they found the corridors buzzing with activity that seemed equal parts excitement and apprehension. Walsh was waiting in her office with Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, both women wearing expressions that suggested significant developments. Captain Rodriguez, Brennan began without preamble, we need to discuss what happens next. Colonel Mitchell is currently at brigade headquarters explaining to General Harrison why he's transferring one of the most qualified instructors on this base to administrative duties. Maya took a seat, her mind still reeling from the conversation with Colonel Hawkins. How much trouble is he in? That depends on several factors, Brennan replied. The video of your shot has been analyzed by experts at Fort Benning. They've confirmed that it was a legitimate 2,000-yard engagement under challenging conditions using standard equipment. That kind of performance is rare even among professional competitive shooters. Walsh leaned forward. More importantly, they've been reviewing your entire training record here. Your student scores, your safety record, your teaching evaluations, everything. Want to guess what they found? Maya shook her head, though she suspected she knew where this was going. You're not just performing above average, Captain. You're performing at a level that suggests fundamental improvements in training methodology. Your students are retaining information better, shooting more accurately, and showing higher confidence levels than comparable classes taught by instructors with more experience. Which raises some uncomfortable questions about why you were being transferred, Walsh added. The implications were starting to crystallize in Maya's mind. If her performance was demonstrably superior to her peers, then Mitchell's decision to reassign her looked less like reasonable command judgment and more like personal bias. In an institution that prided itself on meritocracy, that kind of bias was career-ending. There's something else, Brennan said, pulling a folder from her briefcase. After your meeting with Colonel Mitchell this afternoon, he contacted the personnel office to expedite your transfer. He wanted you gone by the end of the week. Maya felt anger flare in her chest. He's trying to bury this before anyone can ask uncomfortable questions. Exactly. But he made a mistake. He put his reasoning in writing. According to the transfer request, you're being reassigned due to incompatibility with unit standards and mission requirements. Tommy let out a low whistle. That's going to be hard to justify given the evidence. It gets worse, Walsh said. Or better, depending on your perspective. The transfer request triggered an automatic review by the Inspector General's office, since it involves a decorated combat veteran with outstanding performance ratings. They've requested all documentation related to your assignment here. Maya's phone rang again. Another DC number, though different from Colonel Hawkins' call. This time, the voice belonged to a man who identified himself as Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, from the Army's Media Relations Division. Captain Rodriguez, I need to speak with you immediately about media inquiries related to your performance today. We've had requests from CNN, Fox News, Military Times, and several other outlets. This story is going national. Maya felt the last vestiges of her normal life slipping away. Sir, I never sought media attention. I was just doing my job. I understand that, Captain, but your job performance has become a symbol for larger debates about women in combat roles and military equal opportunity policies. We need to get ahead of this story before it spirals out of control. After scheduling a media briefing for the following morning, Maya hung up and looked around the room at faces that reflected her own mix of apprehension and determination. The situation had moved far beyond the confines of Fort Huachuca, becoming part of national conversations about military effectiveness and gender equality. Captain Rodriguez, Brennan said quietly, I need to ask you directly, do you want to fight this? Because if you do, you'll have support from levels you might not expect. But it's going to get ugly, and it's going to be very public. Maya thought about the conversation with Colonel Hawkins.
about the opportunity that had been hinted at but not fully explained. She thought about the soldiers in the corridor who'd expressed their support, about the students whose performance had improved under her instruction, about the women who would follow in her footsteps. "I joined the army to serve," she said finally. "If fighting this means other qualified women get fair treatment, then yes, I want to fight." The next several hours passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and preparation for what everyone seemed to understand was going to be a watershed moment. Maya found herself at the center of a rapidly expanding support network that included not just her immediate colleagues, but soldiers from across the base who'd heard about the morning's events. Staff Sergeant Thompson appeared in Walsh's office around 1800 hours with a stack of papers and a grim expression. "Captain, you need to see these. They're statements from soldiers who've witnessed Mitchell's treatment of female personnel over the past 2 years." Maya flipped through the statements, each one documenting instances of bias, discrimination, or inappropriate comments that painted a pattern of systemic prejudice. Some were relatively minor, comments about women being too emotional for combat roles or suggestions that female soldiers received special treatment. Others were more serious, describing qualified women being passed over for training opportunities or leadership positions. "Where did these come from?" Maya asked. "Word got out about what happened today. Soldiers started coming forward with their own experiences. Turns out you weren't the only one Mitchell had problems with." Corporal Kim knocked on the office door, looking even more excited than usual. "Captain Rodriguez, you need to come see this. The video has gone viral. It's being shared on every military social media group I can find." Maya followed Kim to a computer terminal where the video of her shot was playing on repeat. The comments section was filled with thousands of responses from current and former military personnel, most expressing amazement at the technical skill displayed and frustration with the apparent circumstances that had led to the demonstration. But it was the view count that made Maya's knees weak. 847,000 views in less than 12 hours, with shares accelerating every minute. Her face and name were being seen by nearly 1 million people, most of whom were forming opinions about her competence, her character, and her right to serve in her chosen role. "This is insane," she muttered.
"It's justice," Kim said firmly. "People need to see what you can do, what women like you bring to the military. This video proves that skill has nothing to do with gender." Maya's phone buzzed with yet another call, this time from a number she recognized as Colonel Mitchell's direct line. She considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided to answer, curious about what he might say after the day's revelations. "Captain Rodriguez?" Mitchell's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I need to see you in my office immediately." "Sir, it's after duty hours. Now, Captain." The line went dead. Maya looked around the room at the concerned faces of her colleagues and friends. Whatever Mitchell wanted to discuss, it wasn't going to be pleasant. "I'll come with you," Tommy offered. Maya shook her head. "This is something I need to handle myself." The walk to Mitchell's office felt different this time, less like approaching execution and more like walking toward a confrontation that had been inevitable from the moment she'd arrived at Fort Huachuca. The headquarters building was mostly empty at this hour, and Maya's footsteps echoed through corridors lit by emergency lighting. Mitchell's aide was long gone, but his office door was open, and light spilled into the hallway. Maya knocked and entered to find Mitchell sitting behind his desk, still in uniform but with his jacket unbuttoned and his usually perfect appearance disheveled. "Close the door and have a seat, Captain." Maya complied, studying Mitchell's face for clues about his state of mind. What she saw there was exhaustion mixed with something that might have been defeat. "I've just spent 4 hours at brigade headquarters, explaining to General Harrison why I was transferring one of my most effective instructors to administrative duties.
It was not a pleasant conversation. Maya remained silent, sensing that Mitchell needed to talk through whatever conclusions he'd reached during his meeting with the general. The Inspector General's office will be here next week to conduct a formal investigation into my command decisions regarding female personnel. Media Relations wants me to participate in a press conference explaining the Army's commitment to equal opportunity. And my wife spent an hour on the phone tonight asking me to explain why our son's life was saved by a soldier I've been trying to get rid of. The mention of his wife and son seemed to deflate his remaining bluster. For the first time since Maya had known him, he looked like what he was, a tired, middle-aged man whose certainties had been challenged by circumstances beyond his control. Captain Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Maya felt her carefully maintained composure waver. She expected continued hostility, attempts at damage control, maybe even threats about her future career. An apology was so unexpected that she wasn't sure how to respond. Sir? Mitchell reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a file folder. I've been reviewing your personnel records, your combat reports, your performance evaluations from Afghanistan. I've also been talking to officers who served with you downrange. He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Major Stevens, your company commander during your second tour, described you as the most technically proficient and tactically sound sniper I've ever worked with. Captain Morrison called you irreplaceable after your first deployment. Colonel Harris at Bagram said your Overwatch support saved more American lives than any single soldier in his area of operations. Maya listened in stunned silence as Mitchell read through evaluation after evaluation, each one praising her competence, her leadership, her dedication to mission accomplishment and soldier welfare.
And yet somehow, Mitchell continued, I convinced myself that these evaluations were inflated, that your achievements were exaggerated, that your presence here was some kind of political statement rather than a recognition of proven capability. He closed the folder and met Maya's eyes directly. I was wrong, Captain. Wrong about your qualifications, wrong about your motivations, and wrong about what your success here represents for the Army. Maya felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but fought them back. Sir, I never wanted this to become personal. I just wanted to do my job. I know, and you've been doing it exceptionally well, despite my best efforts to undermine your confidence and effectiveness. Mitchell stood up and moved to the window that looked out over the training ranges. General Harrison made it very clear this afternoon that my attitudes toward female soldiers are not consistent with Army values or policies. He also made it clear that my career prospects are directly tied to my ability to adapt to the modern military. Mitchell turned back to face Maya. Your transfer to administrative duties has been canceled. You'll continue as an advanced marksmanship instructor, with expanded responsibilities for curriculum development and instructor training. You'll also be working directly with the marksmanship unit at Fort Benning to develop new training standards based on your techniques. Maya felt like the room was spinning. Sir, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Captain. This is just the beginning. The media attention, the congressional interest, the pressure to be a symbol rather than just a soldier. It's going to be intense. Are you prepared for that? Maya thought about Colonel Hawkins' phone call, about the opportunity that had been hinted at, about the soldiers who'd expressed their support throughout the day. I think so, sir.
But I'm going to need support from my chain of command. Mitchell nodded slowly. You'll have it. And Captain, for what it's worth, I'm sorry it took a public embarrassment for me to recognize what should have been obvious from the beginning. Maya stood to leave, then paused at the door. Sir, your son is a good soldier. When his unit was in trouble, he kept his men together and followed proper procedures for requesting support. You should be proud of him. Mitchell's voice was thick with emotion when he replied, I am, Captain, and I'm beginning to understand that I should be proud of the soldiers who kept him safe, too. 3 weeks after the shot that changed everything, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at Fort Benning, Georgia, addressing an audience of military marksmanship instructors from across the Army. The presentation she was giving, Advanced Long-Range Techniques for Combat Applications, represented the culmination of months of analysis, curriculum development, and the kind of institutional recognition she'd once thought impossible. The audience included not just instructors, but senior officers, Pentagon officials, and representatives from military training institutions around the world. In the front row sat General Patricia Morrison, the first female commandant of the infantry school, whose presence signaled the Army's commitment to the changes Maya's story had catalyzed. The fundamental principle, Maya was explaining, gesturing to a slide that showed wind-reading techniques, is that extreme-range marksmanship isn't about luck or intuition. It's about systematic analysis, disciplined preparation, and the confidence that comes from thorough training. She clicked to the next slide, which showed student performance data from Fort Huachuca. When we implement these techniques in our standard curriculum, we see a 37% improvement in first-round hit probability at ranges beyond 800 meters. More importantly, we see increased confidence and tactical flexibility among soldiers who understand they can engage threats at distances previously considered impossible.
The questions that followed were technical, professional, and respectful, a marked contrast to the skeptical reception she'd grown accustomed to receiving from male audiences. But Maya knew that the change in tone wasn't just about her proven competence. It was about the broader shift in Army culture that had accelerated since her confrontation with Colonel Mitchell became public. After the presentation, Maya found herself surrounded by instructors wanting to discuss specific techniques, share their own experiences with long-range training, and express appreciation for the new standards she'd helped establish. The conversation continued through lunch and into the afternoon, the kind of professional exchange she'd always hoped for, but rarely experienced. Captain Rodriguez, General Morrison approached as the crowd began to thin. Excellent presentation. I understand you've been selected for the Advanced Military Studies program? Maya nodded. Yes, ma'am. I'll be starting at Leavenworth in the fall. Outstanding! The Army needs officers who can think strategically about training and doctrine. Your work here is going to influence how we prepare soldiers for decades to come. The Advanced Military Studies program was the opportunity Colonel Hawkins had hinted at during their first phone conversation, a year-long program that prepared mid-career officers for senior leadership positions by exposing them to advanced tactical and strategic concepts. Graduation from AMSP was virtually a guarantee of promotion to major and assignment to positions where real influence over Army policies was possible. Maya's selection for the program had been announced the same week that Colonel Mitchell's investigation concluded with his reassignment to a desk job at the Pentagon. The timing wasn't coincidental. The Army was making very public statements about rewarding merit and punishing discrimination, using Maya's story as a case study in both institutional failure and institutional learning. General, I want you to know that none of this was about personal advancement. I just wanted to be allowed to do my job. Morrison smiled. The best leaders rarely seek leadership, Captain. They simply perform their duties so well that leadership becomes inevitable. That evening, Maya found herself back at Fort Huachuca for what would be her final week as an instructor before reporting to Leavenworth. The base felt different now, partly because of the media attention that had gradually faded but never entirely disappeared, partly because of the policy changes that had followed her story becoming public. The advanced marksmanship course now included 3 female instructors, up from Maya's lone assignment 6 months earlier. The curriculum had been completely rewritten to incorporate the techniques Maya had developed, and student performance had improved across every measurable metric. Perhaps most importantly, the culture had shifted. Female soldiers were no longer assumed to be less capable, and male instructors who expressed doubts about gender integration found themselves isolated and irrelevant. Maya walked to the memorial garden where she'd received Colonel Hawkins' first phone call, settling onto the same bench where she'd contemplated the end of her career. Now she was looking toward a future that included possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. Senior leadership positions, influence over Army doctrine, the chance to shape training standards for a new generation of soldiers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Chen, who'd recently been selected for promotion to Sergeant First Class and assignment as the Senior NCO for the new co-ed Advanced Marksmanship program. "Saw your presentation online. Killed it. The kid from New Mexico did good." Maya smiled, remembering their conversation months earlier, when Tommy had warned her that the fight with Mitchell wasn't over. He'd been right, but not in the way either of them had expected. The fight had expanded beyond Fort Huachuca, beyond individual careers, becoming part of a larger transformation in how the Army valued and utilized the talents of all its soldiers. "Captain Rodriguez?" Maya turned to see Staff Sergeant Thompson approaching, now wearing the additional chevron that reflected her recent promotion to Sergeant First Class. Behind her was Corporal Kim, now Sergeant Kim, and several of the other soldiers who'd supported Maya during the difficult weeks following her confrontation with Mitchell.
"We wanted to catch you before you left," Thompson said, "to say thank you." "For what?" Maya asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "For not backing down," Kim replied. "For showing us that fighting for what's right is worth the risk. For proving that excellence speaks louder than prejudice." Thompson nodded. "There are 6 women in the current advanced marksmanship course, Captain. 6 months ago, that would have been impossible. Young female soldiers are volunteering for combat specialties at rates we've never seen before. You changed something fundamental about how the Army sees itself." Maya looked around the group, seeing faces that reflected the future she'd helped create. Soldiers who would judge each other based on competence rather than gender, who would assume capability rather than doubt, who would build the kind of military she'd always believed the Army could become. "You all did that," she said. "I just made a shot." "You made the shot that had to be made," Kim corrected, "at the moment when it mattered most. That's what leaders do." After the group dispersed, Maya remained in the memorial garden as darkness settled over Fort Huachuca. She thought about the soldiers whose names were carved into the memorial wall, men and women who'd given their lives in service to ideals they might not have lived to see fully realized. Their sacrifice had built the institution she served, flawed but constantly evolving, capable of change when confronted with undeniable evidence of its shortcomings. Her phone rang one final time. A call from her mother in New Mexico, who'd watched Maya's presentation online and wanted to express pride in her daughter's accomplishments. They talked for nearly an hour, sharing memories of hunting trips and shooting competitions that had prepared Maya for a life she couldn't have imagined when she was a teenager learning to read wind patterns in the high desert. "I always knew you were special, mija," her mother said, "but I never knew how much difference one person could make." "I didn't either, Mom. I'm still not sure I understand it all." "You don't have to understand it. You just have to keep being who you are. Honest, dedicated, unwilling to accept anything less than excellence from yourself or anyone else." After the call ended, Maya sat in the desert silence, watching stars emerge in the clear Arizona sky. Tomorrow, she would begin the transition to her new assignment,
leaving behind the ranges and classrooms where she'd proven herself to take on challenges that would test different aspects of her capabilities. But tonight, she simply allowed herself to feel satisfied with what had been accomplished. A discriminatory officer had been held accountable for his actions, training standards had been improved based on proven techniques, barriers that had limited opportunities for qualified women had been removed, and somewhere, young female soldiers were learning that their gender was no obstacle to excellence in any military occupation. Maya's transformation from embattled instructor to recognized expert had taken less than 6 months, but its effects would ripple through the Army for decades. The shot that Colonel Mitchell had bet she'd miss had become a symbol of capability over assumptions, merit over prejudice, courage over conformity. As she finally rose to leave the memorial garden, Maya noticed a new addition to the memorial wall, a plaque honoring female soldiers who'd given their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. Their names joined those of countless others who'd served with honor, their sacrifice now properly recognized alongside their male counterparts. Maya read through the names, some familiar from her own deployments, others representing stories she'd never heard, but whose courage had paved the way for her own opportunities. She thought about the responsibility that came with success, the obligation to use her platform to continue advancing the cause of equality and excellence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, new chances to influence the institution she devoted her life to serving. But tonight, standing in the memorial garden at Fort Huachuca, Maya Rodriguez allowed herself to feel something she'd rarely experienced during her military career: complete confidence that she belonged exactly where she was. 2 years later, Major Maya Rodriguez stood at the podium in the Pentagon's largest briefing room, facing an audience that included the Chief of Staff of the Army, senior generals from across the service, and defense officials from allied nations. The briefing she was delivering, revolutionary training methodologies and their impact on combat effectiveness, represented the culmination of her year at the Advanced Military Studies program and 18 months of groundbreaking research into military education. The data she presented was irrefutable. Units trained using the modified curriculum Maya had developed showed 43% higher performance ratings in combat simulations, 37% fewer training accidents, and 62% higher retention rates among female soldiers in combat specialties. What had started as a single shot on a desert firing range had evolved into a comprehensive reimagining of how the Army prepared its soldiers for modern warfare. The evidence suggests, Maya concluded, that our traditional assumptions about optimal training methodologies were fundamentally flawed. When we eliminate bias from our evaluation criteria and focus purely on measurable outcomes, we discover capabilities that were always present but systematically underutilized. The questions that followed were sophisticated and substantive, reflecting the audience's recognition that they were witnessing a presentation that would influence military doctrine for decades to come. Maya handled each inquiry with the confidence that came from thorough preparation and unassailable evidence, but also with the humility she'd learned during her journey from controversial instructor to respected expert. After the briefing, Maya found herself in the Pentagon's river entrance, waiting for her next appointment, a meeting with the Secretary of the Army to discuss her selection for attendance at the National War College. The assignment would prepare her for strategic-level leadership positions and virtually guarantee promotion to lieutenant colonel within 3 years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Chan, now a master sergeant and the senior enlisted advisor for advanced marksmanship training at Fort Benning. "Saw the Pentagon briefing on C-SPAN. You're officially a big deal now. Don't forget us little people when you're running the Army." Maya smiled, remembering countless similar conversations over their years of friendship and professional partnership. Tommy had been promoted twice since the events at Fort Huachuca, his career accelerated by his association with the successful training program reforms and his own demonstrated competence in implementing new methodologies. "Major Rodriguez,
A young captain appeared at her elbow, wearing the distinctive uniform insignia of a Pentagon aide. "The secretary will see you now." The meeting with Secretary Williams lasted nearly 2 hours, during which Maya found herself discussing not just her own career trajectory, but the broader implications of the Army's evolution toward true merit-based leadership. Williams, who had been a former infantry officer who'd risen through the ranks during the height of the Iraq War, understood the practical benefits of utilizing every available talent regardless of traditional assumptions. "Major," Williams said as their meeting concluded, "I want you to understand that your story has become part of how we explain the modern Army to Congress, to the media, and to the American people. You've become a symbol of institutional change and improvement." Maya shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I've never sought to be a symbol. I just wanted to be a good soldier." "The best symbols rarely seek that role, but they accept the responsibility when circumstances demand it. Your success has opened doors for thousands of other qualified women, and your research has improved training outcomes for every soldier in the Army. That's the kind of impact that defines a successful military career."
5 years later, Lieutenant Colonel Maya Rodriguez walked across the parade ground at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, reviewing the final preparations for a ceremony that would mark the 10th anniversary of the Advanced Training Integration Initiative, the formal name for the policy changes that had grown out of her confrontation with Colonel Mitchell years earlier. As the new commandant of the Combined Arms Center's Advanced Studies program, Maya was responsible for ensuring that the ceremony properly honored both the progress made and the work still remaining. The changes over the past decade had been dramatic. Female representation in combat specialties had increased by over 200%. Training accident rates had dropped to historic lows as new methodologies eliminated dangerous hazing and discrimination. Most importantly, combat effectiveness ratings had improved across every measurable category as the Army learned to maximize the capabilities of all its personnel. Maya's own career had followed a trajectory that would have seemed impossible during her early years at Fort Huachuca. After graduating from the National War College, she'd commanded a training battalion, served as an operations officer in Afghanistan during the final drawdown, and spent 2 years at the Pentagon helping draft the doctrine that now governed military education throughout the Department of Defense. Her marriage to Dr. James Sullivan, a civilian researcher she'd met during her work college assignment, had produced 2 children and a partnership that balanced her military obligations with a rich personal life. Their daughter Alina, now 8, had already expressed interest in following her mother's footsteps into military service, while their son Michael seemed more inclined toward his father's academic pursuits. Colonel Rodriguez, Captain Sarah Kim approached. Corporal Kim from Fort Huachuca, now a company commander herself, and one of the rising stars in the Army's new generation of leaders. "The ceremony preparations are complete. We're ready whenever you are." Maya nodded, studying the assembled crowd that included hundreds of soldiers, dozens of senior officers, and representatives from military institutions around the world. In the VIP section, she could see familiar faces from her journey. Master Sergeant Walsh, now retired but serving as a consultant on military education, General Morrison, recently promoted to 4 stars and commanding the Army Training and Doctrine Command, and even James Mitchell Jr., now a major himself and one of the most vocal advocates for the training reforms his mother's former adversary had helped inspire. Notably absent was Colonel Mitchell, Sr., who'd retired quietly 3 years earlier after a Pentagon assignment that had kept him far from any position where he could influence personnel decisions. Maya had heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd become something of a changed man, privately acknowledging the mistakes of his earlier career and even supporting organizations that promoted military diversity. The ceremony began with traditional military pageantry, color guards, martial music, and the formal presentations that marked important military occasions. But the heart of the event was a series of presentations by soldiers whose careers had been shaped by the changes Maya's story had catalyzed. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Martinez, one of the first female graduates of the Reformed Ranger School, spoke about how new training standards had prepared her for 3 combat deployments without the traditional barriers that had once limited women's opportunities. Captain David Thompson, Staff Sergeant Thompson's son, who'd followed his mother into military service, described how integrated training had made his unit more effective during recent operations in Africa. But it was the final speaker,
who provided the most powerful testimony to the changes that had occurred. Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, no relation to Maya despite the shared name, had enlisted in the Army as a private 10 years earlier, inspired by news reports of a female sniper who'd proven herself against institutional bias. "When I was 18, Rodriguez told the assembled crowd, I watched a video of Captain Maya Rodriguez making an impossible shot at Fort Huachuca. But what inspired me wasn't the marksmanship, it was the courage she showed in standing up for what was right, even when it could have ended her career."
Maya felt tears threatening as the young sergeant continued her remarks. "Today, I'm the senior enlisted advisor for a special operations unit that includes 12 women among its 57 personnel. We deploy together, we fight together, and we succeed together because leaders like Colonel Rodriguez proved that excellence has no gender." When the formal ceremony concluded, Maya found herself surrounded by soldiers, officers, and civilian officials who wanted to share their own stories of how the military had changed over the past decade. The conversations continued through a reception that lasted well into the evening, each personal account adding to Maya's understanding of the ripple effects her single moment of defiance had created. 10 years later, Brigadier General Maya Rodriguez stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, waiting to be introduced for a ceremony recognizing military leaders who'd significantly impacted American defense capabilities. At 45, she was one of the youngest general officers in Army history, and her promotion had been accompanied by assignment as the Deputy Commanding General of the Army Training and Doctrine Command, the position responsible for how the entire Army prepared its soldiers for modern warfare. The past 5 years had brought challenges that would have tested any military leader. Regional conflicts in Southeast Asia and Africa had required rapid deployment of forces trained using the methodologies Maya had helped develop. The results had been overwhelmingly positive. American units consistently outperformed expectations, suffered fewer casualties, and achieved objectives with unprecedented efficiency. Maya's personal life had evolved as well. Dr. Sullivan had accepted a position at the Pentagon, allowing their family to remain together as her career demanded increasing responsibilities. Elena, now 18, had been accepted to West Point and was planning to follow her mother's path into military service. Michael, 16, was pursuing advanced studies in international relations and showing interest in diplomatic rather than military careers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president's voice carried across the Rose Garden, "Brigadier General Maya Rodriguez, whose innovative approaches to military training have revolutionized how America prepares its defenders." Maya stepped forward to accept the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor available to military personnel. The citation read by the president summarized her contributions. "For exceptional service to the United States Army and the cause of military excellence, developing training methodologies that have improved combat effectiveness while advancing equality and opportunity for all service members." As the ceremony concluded and Maya mingled with other honorees, scientists, educators, and public servants who'd made significant contributions to American society, she reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. A single shot on a desert firing range made in frustration and defiance had somehow catalyzed changes that affected hundreds of thousands of soldiers and their families. 15 years later, Major General Maya Rodriguez walked through the halls of the Pentagon preparing for her final day of active duty before retirement. Tomorrow, she would transition to civilian life as the Dean of Military Studies at Georgetown University, where she would continue influencing military education through research and teaching rather than direct command. Her replacement as Deputy Commanding General of TRADOC was Colonel Maya Rodriguez, her daughter, now 33, and one of the most respected officers of her generation. Elena had served 2 combat tours, commanded at every level from platoon to brigade, and earned recognition as an innovative thinker who'd helped adapt her mother's training concepts for the challenges of modern warfare. The symmetry wasn't lost on Maya. The daughter was assuming responsibilities that the mother had pioneered, continuing a cycle of progress that she hoped would extend through future generations of military leaders.
Her retirement ceremony had been held the previous week at Fort Leavenworth, attended by soldiers from around the world who'd been influenced by her work. The speakers had included generals, enlisted personnel, and civilian officials, all testifying to the fundamental changes in military culture that could be traced back to a morning at Fort Huachuca when a captain had decided to prove her competence rather than accept discrimination.
Tommy Chen, now a retired command sergeant major, had provided the most personal tribute. Maya Rodriguez taught all of us that excellence recognizes no boundaries except those we impose on ourselves. She showed us that fighting for what's right is always worth the risk, and that one person's courage can change an entire institution. 20 years later, Dr. Maya Rodriguez stood at the podium in Georgetown University's largest lecture hall, delivering her final class before retirement from academic life. The course, Military Leadership and Institutional Change, had become one of the most popular offerings in the university's Policy Studies program, attracting students from around the world who wanted to understand how large organizations could be transformed from within. At 72, Maya moved with the careful deliberation of age, but still commanded attention through the force of her intellect and experience. Her students included active-duty military officers, future diplomats, corporate executives, and idealistic young people who hoped to change the world through public service. "The lesson I want to leave you with," Maya said, looking out at faces that represented the future of American leadership, "is that institutions are only as strong as the individuals who serve them, and individuals are only as effective as their willingness to challenge assumptions that limit human potential." She clicked to her final slide, which showed a photograph from that morning at Fort Huachuca, a young captain behind a rifle, surrounded by soldiers watching an impossible shot unfold in the desert heat. This photograph was taken 37 years ago. I was angry that morning, frustrated by months of discrimination and bias that seemed to define my military experience. I made a shot that I hoped would prove my competence to people who'd already decided I was unqualified. She paused, studying the faces of students who'd grown up in a world shaped by the changes her story had catalyzed. What I learned that day was that proving individual competence isn't enough. Real change requires the courage to challenge systems, the persistence to endure setbacks, and the wisdom to understand that personal success is meaningless unless it creates opportunities for others. The class ended with sustained applause, but Maya's favorite part came afterward, during the informal discussions that always followed her lectures. Students approached with questions that ranged from technical military matters to broader questions about leadership, ethics, and the responsibility that came with positions of authority. "Dr. Rodriguez," asked Maria Santos, a young woman planning a career in international development, "what would you tell someone who's facing discrimination in their chosen field?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I'd tell them that they have three choices: accept the limitations others try to impose, find ways to work around those limitations, or refuse to accept them and fight for change. The third option is the hardest and riskiest, but it's also the only one that creates better opportunities for the people who come after you." 25 years later, Elena Rodriguez, now a three-star general and the first woman to command the Army Training and Doctrine Command, stood before the memorial statue that had been erected at Fort Huachuca 5 years earlier. The bronze sculpture depicted a female soldier in a shooting position, rifle trained on a distant target, with an inscription that read, "In honor of all who refuse to accept limitations on human potential." Elena had come to Fort Huachuca for the annual ceremony commemorating the shot heard around the Army, as military historians had dubbed her mother's demonstration 42 years earlier. The event had grown over the decades, becoming a celebration of military excellence and an opportunity for reflection on how far the institution had evolved. The current Fort Huachuca bore little resemblance to the base where Maya had faced discrimination and bias.
Female soldiers made up nearly 40% of the training cadre.
The advanced marksmanship program had become a model for military education institutions worldwide. The changes that had begun with Maya's confrontation with Colonel Mitchell had rippled through every aspect of military culture. Elena's own career had been shaped by the opportunities her mother's courage had created, but she'd also faced unique challenges as the daughter of a famous military figure. Early in her career, some had suggested her rapid promotion was due to her family name rather than her competence. She'd responded by outperforming every standard, earning respect through the same combination of excellence and determination that had characterized her mother's service. Now, as she prepared to retire and transition to civilian life, Elena reflected on the responsibility she'd inherited and the legacy she hoped to leave for future generations of military leaders. General Rodriguez approached Colonel Michael Sullivan, Elena's younger brother who had eventually chosen military service over diplomatic careers, inspired by his sister's example and their mother's legacy. "The ceremony is ready to begin." Elena nodded, walking toward the memorial where hundreds of soldiers, veterans, and family members had gathered to commemorate not just a single moment of excellence, but the broader transformation it had represented. As the ceremony began, Elena thought about her mother, now 87, and living quietly in Virginia with the satisfaction that came from a life well lived and a legacy that had improved countless other lives. Maya still received visits from soldiers whose careers had been influenced by her example, still corresponded with researchers studying military culture and institutional change, still served as an inspiration for anyone facing barriers that seemed insurmountable. The guest speaker for this year's ceremony was General James Martinez, the Army Chief of Staff and a protege of Maya's from her days at the Combined Arms Center. His remarks focused on the continuing evolution of military culture and the importance of maintaining the progress that had been achieved over the past 4 decades. "The shot we commemorate today," Martinez told the assembled crowd, represented more than exceptional marksmanship. It represented the refusal to accept artificial limitations on human potential. It represented the courage to stand up for principle even when the personal cost seemed unbearable. And it represented the faith that institutions can change when confronted with undeniable evidence of their shortcomings. Elena felt tears in her eyes as Martinez continued, describing how Maya's example had influenced his own career and the careers of thousands of other soldiers. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all soldiers who'd sacrificed to advance the cause of equality and excellence, followed by a rifle salute that echoed across the desert ranges where Maya had once proved herself against seemingly impossible odds. As the crowd dispersed, Elena remained at the memorial, studying the bronze face that captured her mother's determination and courage. Tomorrow, she would begin her own transition to civilian life, carrying forward the responsibility to mentor future leaders and continue advancing the cause of military excellence.
The desert wind carried the sounds of training activities from the ranges beyond, soldiers learning the skills that might keep them alive in combat, preparing for challenges they couldn't yet imagine, building the kind of military institution that valued competence over convention and results over assumptions. Elena smiled, knowing that her mother's legacy was secure, not because of monuments or ceremonies, but because of the countless soldiers whose lives and careers had been improved by the changes that began with a single shot on a bright Arizona morning 42 years earlier. The sun was setting over Fort Huachuca, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Elena of the moment when everything changed, when a captain decided to prove herself rather than accept discrimination, when excellence triumphed over prejudice, when one person's courage transformed an entire institution. The story would continue, Elena knew, through new generations of soldiers who would face their own challenges and opportunities, who would build on the foundation her mother had helped establish, who would prove again and again that human potential recognizes no boundaries except those we impose on ourselves.
As Elena finally turned to leave the memorial, she whispered a promise to the bronze figure that had inspired so many. "The mission continues, Mom. The mission continues." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you were enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.